and welcome to another episode of Creative Space, a podcast where we explore, learn, and grow in creativity together. I'm your host, Jennifer Logue, and today we have the pleasure of chatting with opera singer Julia Dawson. Originally from Canada, she's been hailed by Opera News as radiant and riveting, and by the New York Times as beautiful in face and voice. She's the winner of the George London Award for a Canadian Singer and the Annie Schlemm Prize from Opera Frankfurt, which is awarded once every 5 years, by the way. Her debut solo album, Girl in the Snow, is available on all streaming platforms, and her film, Obscura Nox, makes its premiere at Opera Philadelphia's O22 Festival. I am so honored to have Julia Dawson on Creative Space. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh my gosh. So one thing I wanted to talk about first is you're a coloratura soprano, and we have all sorts of listeners. Do you want to tell our listeners what a coloratura soprano is in opera?
Sure. So not to get too nerdy, I'm a soprano, and I happen to sing coloratura, which are a lot of little notes. So a voice teacher once said, it's like fly shit on the page. And
oh my God.
So it's like when you just sing a lot of runs. And so that happens in other styles as well. And when people talk about coloratura sopranos, they often think of people singing like the Queen of the Night. So that all the really, really high stuff. And I don't sing so high, but I do I sing a lot of music with scales in it. And that also comes in the film, which I know we'll talk about later in Mozart's music. And he wrote a lot of really giddy, happy scales to show this sort of bubbly celebration in the music.
Oh, I got chills. It is beautiful though, and you have a tremendous, tremendous voice, Julia. So I'm so grateful that you're here on Creative Space. I like to start by going to the very beginning, and opera is something that I didn't discover for myself until later in life. But when did you first discover your love for music, and how did you make that discovery of opera? Was it always a part of your life, or?
Well, I discovered music really early. My dad is a classical double bass player in the Toronto Symphony. And so he and my mom were always playing music, always playing classical music. And they had a recording, it was called Classical Kids. And it was exactly that. It was really short snippets of classical music in English for kids. And they had the magic flute. And it was done by a bunch of Toronto singers, and they had somebody singing the Queen of the Night. And so at 4 years old or so, I would run around the house and I just couldn't get enough of it. I was so happy. And my mom used to say, I knew when you were sick because it was the only time that you'd shut up and not be singing.
Oh my gosh.
That you were feeling terrible. So that was really the first introduction. And then, we used to go to concerts at the Toronto Symphony all the time, and I'd sort of fall asleep. And I think it kind of went in somewhere. And singing in choirs and I got to teach a little bit and conduct a little bit when I was a young teenager. But I really wanted to do musical theater. And I started, and musical theater just seemed like what all the cool kids were doing. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. Which would have been great, except I really started dance super late and was very shy with my body. I was like, oh, I don't know that this is going to work. And around that time, I went up into my attic of our house, and there were all these boxes of records. And I pulled out a record of Maria Callas singing Bel Canto. And I turned it on, and this otherworldly sound came out, and I didn't even know that humans could make that sound. And I had no idea what she was saying, no idea what it was about. And I went, that, I need to do that. And I need to figure out what's going on here.
How old were you at the time?
I think I was 14.
Wow. Okay. It was just that eureka moment.
Yeah. I think I had this sense that there was so much to discover. And even then, this kind of feeling like, oof, I think I probably will never get to the end of exploring this. And that was really appealing to me.
Oh my gosh. So what were next steps after that? You had that moment. Did you change how you were training? What happened next?
Well, I was in Ohio at the Oberlin Conservatory.
Oh, cool.
And then I was at Rice in Houston, and then AVA in Philly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very
Lots
cool.
of school.
Yes. I mean, what is the schooling like when you're an opera singer? I mean, is that traditionally the trajectory?
It's getting to be more and more. It's quite a lot of school. I have a girlfriend, a wonderful soprano, and she always says, yeah, if I hadn't been studying opera, I would be a doctor by now. All the training that we do, which is very silly. I think you don't have to. There's definitely, there are many ways to boil an egg, but for me, it happened that way.
That's wonderful. I mean, there's so much to learn. So much Italian.
Well, exactly.
Well, not just Italian, but
yeah, I mean, Italian, German, French are the basics, and then often now people, if not studying the language, they'll study the diction, like the pronunciation of Czech and Russian. And then music, opera singers, we start later in comparison to our instrumental colleagues who maybe started playing when they were 4. And if an opera singer only discovered they had a voice when they were 17, then they start learning their music theory from age 17. So the violinist, has a good 12 years head start often. So often for singers, there's a lot, as you say, to sort of cover in university.
That's cool though. I mean, you're studying what you're passionate about. So it's like, bring it on. Bring it on.
Oh, it's incredible. I used to go into the library at Oberlin College, and I would just grab scores, and then I would go, and they still had CDs. So I would go and I'd get the CDs from the clerk at the desk, and then just sit. And I know, crazy.
A CD is way back. We're going retro here.
Yeah, in minor.
I feel you.
Actually. But yeah, and there was just this portal into other worlds of creation and of music, and it was sort of addictive.
Oh my gosh. And you can never get enough. It's this whole universe that opens up once you find your calling. Now talking about creativity, because this is creative space, and I love asking this question because everyone has a different perspective on it. But how would you define creativity?
I would define it as the purest expression of your soul in that moment. So I think it's a very childlike act in that even as adults, we're able to open up with incredible vulnerability and express something without the fear responses that maybe in day-to-day life would restrict that expression.
Okay, so it's the most pure expression. How does it manifest when you're assuming a new role? I always find that so interesting.
Well, I think learning a new role is not so creative. I think that's really the wood chipping. It's, if you get a block of wood, you have to shape it first. You have to sort of cut down I don't do woodworking. So I don't know why I use that analogy, but
it's all good. I don't either.
But, so we have to learn the rhythms. We have to learn the notes. We have to, often translate the score. So there's a lot of just kind of downloading all the information.
Yes.
And so that's step one. And then as we do that, as I do that, my challenge is to kind of stay relaxed so that I can really absorb that information with ease. Because I've noticed sometimes if I absorb it in a hectic way, then later I have to sort of unlearn the hectic energy with which I took in the information.
So you have to be in the right place to receive the information. So you don't translate that in the actual performance down the line. So it's not embedded in that's so interesting.
That's sort of a new thing that I'm exploring, but it's been really helpful. This idea that allowing myself to be really present, kind of like if you're meditating and you can have a little bit of distance. And so you're just learning and observing whatever your brain wants to say about that process. With a bit of, distance, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. Because when we have the monkey brain going on, it's really hard to have that pure expression of anything. Because the fear and the hectic energy, it's almost like static on a radio.
Yeah.
Or static on a track. Like, oh, what is that? It's not quite there. It's close, but it's not. Okay. That's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. In life, do you have, apart from opera, do you have certain practices that you have to stay creative, or do you have other interests outside of what you do in the opera world?
Yeah. I think one thing that's really important to me is my meditation practice. That's been a real grounding force, especially during the pandemic.
Yes.
And I love to read. I love to walk. I have a dachshund, so she walks with me everywhere. So I wish I could come up with really exciting other interests, but mostly I read, meditate, walk the dog, and listen to music.
That's beautiful. That's how you're able to receive all this great energy and keep that relaxed state. It's so important. I'm also a big fan of meditation. So yes. Oh my gosh. Now back to the creative life, and what is the greatest challenge, would you say, in terms of unleashing your full creative potential? Have you had any specific challenges in your career so far where you're like, okay, how am I going to work on this?
Yeah, I have. I think one big one was my move to Germany. So after my studies in the States, I got a job at the Opera Frankfurt in Germany, and it was pretty short notice, and I did not expect the culture shock that I experienced moving to Germany. I really took it for granted. I just thought, it'll be fine. I spoke not a word of German. Zero. My repertoire is mostly Italian. It's mostly French. So I had never had occasion to think about learning German. And I got there and really struggled with what I perceived as, from my paradigm, as a coldness and a disconnect, as well as communicating on the level of a 3-year-old. And so that was really challenging for me, because I felt like I had, when I got the job, I was so ecstatic. It was my first big job as a singer. And I thought, oh yeah, okay, I'm cooking with gas here. And then it was like, in a way, hitting this wall and going, ooh, this is a challenge not being able to express myself day to day, as well as in rehearsals. And so that really, I think it made me think about the things, the paradigms in which I had functioned in North America, and one of which was, as a female, a lot of sort of people pleasing. And I did not notice this until I came to Germany, and I had not been ever conscious of it, of doing it really. But as a girl in North America, if you need to get something done, there's, you can sort of smile and be pleasing generally. And often that will elicit a positive response that helps you to accomplish whatever you need to get done.
Right. It's not the same way in Germany.
No, it is 100% not the same way.
I love it.
It was amazing. It taught me so much. I would go in and not understanding the form, also having missed the deadline, not knowing what was going on, and just thinking, but it's fine. We'll work with it, right? And I said, I'm so sorry. I didn't understand, and I just don't know. And they'd be like, you missed the deadline. Nope. And I would sort of sit there, and I hit this wall. And honestly, I noticed a lot of indignance in myself at this, because I had been unaware of how I was functioning. And then suddenly this silent system that had been working my whole life was no longer functioning.
So interesting. It's like it forced you out of a comfort zone you didn't even know you had.
Exactly. And I think that's a really long story to say it helped me to mature as an artist, because I think also in singing, I was used to doing what everybody else told me to do, because that got me positive feedback. And I understood that as success. And the past few years here, and then over the pandemic, I have really redefined that and started listening to myself more, and listening to that inner voice that's telling me what I'm really interested in singing, what kind of stories I want to tell, which as an opera singer is not always possible. One singer is a very small part often of a full opera production. But that's why it's also nice to do these other projects like Obscura Nox, this film that we'll talk about, or albums, because you can really decide on the repertoire and really take ownership and have agency in your creativity. And I think the nature of educating an opera singer, as we talked about, there's so much to learn. And it's a really foreign thing, right? It's not just the foreign languages, but it's this style of music that is not something we hear every day. Unless you turn to the right radio station or you hear it on the internet, you don't really encounter it. And I think for me, there was this sense that one had to be a perfectionist to get it perfect, to be exactly what the composer had wanted, because, you forget that Mozart is dead and we don't exactly know what he wanted. We think we have an idea of it. But so it can, I think for many people, and for me, definitely, I go through periods where it can get quite stiff, my music making or my singing, because there's this sense that you want everything to be note perfect, we say. So every single pitch completely exactly as you want. Of course, as soon as that starts happening, we're not present. We're not in the moment. We're not allowing ourselves, our being to come through and express the music and the fun and the drama, which is actually what audiences want. And I have to remind myself the audiences don't care if you make mistakes. The audience cares if you're boring or if you're interesting.
Yes. And on a much lower, like, you know, aspiring singer-songwriter scale, I struggled with that. Like, I wanted to be a perfect singer. Like, I always, people would say, oh, what a great show. And I think, oh my gosh, like, I didn't quite hit that note the way I wanted to. And like, and now when I think about my favorite artists, like, I love Bob Dylan. He just, all my favorite artists, it comes from the heart. They just let the creative spirit just completely overtake them. And, you know, and then when you're skilled at your craft, when you do the studying, the rest of that almost, it becomes natural to you. So you can let it rip and just, but I totally hear you with the stiffness, like that focus on perfection. It can be a wonderful performance, but it's like that slight move to the left or right to just let yourself be lost in it. That's what makes like a tremendous, like, oh my gosh, everyone gets chills, like, oh my goodness.
Yes, I think for me, it's taking pleasure in it. And for me, that's been, not that I was raised particularly strict, but that idea seemed almost naughty somehow, you know, irresponsible. And I think this idea of just really just allowing that to what I'm doing to be pleasurable. And, you know, then the audience feels that as well.
I love that. That is like, I need to put that quote on my wall somewhere. To take pleasure in your creativity, like savor it.
Yeah.
That energy just feels so good. I love that. That's brilliant, Julia. Yeah. That's awesome.
Not to lean into cliche, right? But it really is, it's like radical self-love and self-acceptance in the moment. Yes. Even with, you know, mistakes and all, and just kind of really just accepting that this is wonderful, like what we're doing in each moment.
It's like, and how we grow as humans takes the art further.
Yeah.
Like there's like, once you become a master of craft, there's this whole, it never ends.
Yeah. Who's that? Was it Pablo Casals? Who, I'm going to misquote it, but he was at the end of his 70s or his 80s, and someone said, well, why do you still practice every day? Somebody who'd performed as a soloist everywhere in the world. And he said, well, because I think I'm really making progress.
I love it. We just have to keep going. Like there is no other option. And I think when you don't do the things that make you tick, then you start like having some emotional problems. Like if I don't create for a while, I start getting sad, and that's why we have to. We just have to. We can't just, consume and just.
Yeah. The sort of stagnant energy, I think for sure can be really detrimental.
Yeah. But you're definitely the opposite of stagnant, because beyond performing at Opera Frankfurt and all around the world, you do your own creative projects, which help you feel even more empowered. So I'd love to talk more about Obscura Nox, because it is so cool. There's so many layers to it that, so basically it's an opera film that's a modern retelling of Plato's allegory of the cave, which the philosophy nerd in me was like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. But how did this project come about?
Well, this was a real labor of love. So in 2020, I had partnered for a few smaller film projects with the wonderful director Mary Birnbaum. She's based in New York. She teaches at Juilliard and directs all over the world. And a friend of mine, Alex Brusentsev, he's an audio engineer and a producer in Frankfurt. And so the three of us had done some sort of fun things. We did a duet from Don Giovanni with a wonderful baritone in New York. And, it was all this when everyone was doing the quarantine. So people would film on their cell phones. And then someone would edit it all together. And so, we'd done a few of those and it was getting really fun. And it, we weren't sure what live performing was going to look like for the next while. And a grant came up and Mary said to me, well, what would you absolutely love to sing? And at that point, I thought immediately of Mozart's Exultate Jubilate, which is this incredible, joyful piece of church music. And it ends with Alleluia. And this is when the singer just sings a bunch of scales on Alleluia. And it's just the happiest, most joyful thing. And I think everyone was just so kind of exhausted. And I just thought I would love to make a piece that culminates in this, something that's sort of hopeful and joyful. And I had oddly done a 6th grade book report on Plato's Allegory of the Cave.
Wonderful.
So it's very dear to, I don't know how much I understood of that, but it's very dear to me. And so it's this just a journey of knowledge. And so it's this story of someone tied up in a cave and they're watching the wall, right? And they see all these shadows moving because people behind them in the real world are moving. And so they're watching the wall and enjoying their lives and thinking, just, this is great, this is it, got it. And then one of them gets free of the chair and goes up into the world and is totally blinded and can't even see anything. And it's really painful. And then as they acclimate, they are just struck by this incredibly beautiful 3D world. And then it goes on. But that's sort of what I was really passionate about showing. And I thought it would be so cool to do that sort of in the context of the digital world. And for so many of us, especially during COVID, we had just been so much on our screens. And I think there will be a lot written about mental health and that period, and us consuming these really, really addictive pieces of technology that were also very helpful and also, designed to be quite addictive. And this longing for community and to come together IRL, as it were. And so the Mozart is in 3 movements: a happy movement, a sad movement, and a happy movement. Okay. And so then I thought, how are we going to get some drama in there? And so that was enter the wonderful Iranian Canadian composer, Iman Habibi, whom I had met only during the pandemic over a Zoom. And we started developing this piece. And as we were doing this, the Mozart is sung in Latin. And I was thinking, okay, what are we going to do? Is it going to be in English? It would be kind of cool if it were all in Latin, but how am I going to get Latin text? And then it dawned on me, I know someone who is a Latinist.
Oh my gosh. For our listeners, what is a Latinist? And me, I'm going to be honest here.
A Latinist is someone who's has studied Latin and is proficient enough with the the grammar of Latin that she can write song text.
Wonderful.
And so my dear friend Ellen Rummel is this genius, brilliant woman. We went to college together, and so I phoned her up. We were in a book club at the time. I said, Ellen, could you write some Latin poems about Plato's allegory of the cave? And she was like, could I?
Oh my gosh, she was so excited to do it.
So this woman translates Lady Gaga songs into Latin and then sings them at karaoke. Like, it's just, yeah.
I feel like I need to meet this woman. She's really cool.
Everyone needs to meet her.
Oh my
She's
God.
the coolest.
That is amazing.
Yeah. So Ellen and I would just sort of get on Zoom, and she lives in Seattle, and we would just laugh and make really bad puns a lot. And then she created this text that we sent to Iman, and Iman wrote the music. And then meanwhile, I was in Frankfurt, Germany at the time. That's where I was living. And so we got some wonderful, wonderful players from the local opera houses in that area. And they came together. We recorded the music in February 2021. And that was really touch and go because the restrictions of Corona were still very much in effect. And so there was this rule that if I'm going to get it wrong, but if the numbers per sort of area reached a certain level, then there was in Germany, there was a restriction about traveling. And we were really worried about this because one of our horn players was from out of town.
Oh.
And so I remember we were checking these numbers every day, being like, oh gosh, I hope we're going to have a first horn. Oh. But it happened.
Cool.
Yeah. And then Mary Birnbaum, our director, was going to fly over to direct the film part, but she was 7 months pregnant at the time. And we all sort of had a reality check moment about a month and a half before the shoot. We realized that would not be a good thing for her. So she ended up directing it all by Zoom.
Wow.
And yeah. And our incredible choreographer, Claudia Schreier, she's wonderful. She was in Atlanta at the time. And they both got up, I think for our group dance shoot, they stayed up all night. And they were on Zoom as we were in a field with our cast. And they were just such champions doing that virtually for us.
That is so cool. I didn't realize your director and your choreographer were remote. You were able to do this. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Rehearsals were really funny because I just had my iPhone. We were rehearsing in a warehouse, and it had Wi-Fi that we were using from a neighbor, but it didn't reach the whole space. So often I'd be rehearsing with myself and Evie, our dancer, and I would just be holding the iPhone as we rehearsed. And then it would go out of range, and we would just hear from the computer, I lost you. Where are you?
Oh my gosh. You need like a behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And now, gosh, we talked about the social disconnect during the pandemic. What would you say the film's most important message is for you?
Well, all of this came up because I went to a meditation retreat that was really wonderful. And I just had this moment of it sounds so silly, but I had this moment of just wonderful clarity looking at a blade of grass, in this sort of silent moment. And I just thought, there's, I think as human beings, we can make life so hard for ourselves that we kind of let cloud this human experience. And so I think this idea of rebirth, going through a challenge and coming out the other side and really being able to experience just gratitude for just the small things of being with each other, being with loved ones, and community.
So with Obscura Nox, what was it like translating your performance from stage to screen?
It was really interesting because we didn't do a live performance of it. Mm-hmm. So we recorded the music in a studio recording, and then we did the video about a month later. And I think one thing was thinking about acting for film rather than the stage. There were definitely times when I thought I was being very dramatic, and I was like, yo, I nailed it. And I would hear the director just like, yeah, Julia, can you do about 90% less? And I was like, yeah, great. So that was sort of fun and taught me a lot, actually, about kind of being in my body and allowing stillness to have power. And then I think one other thing that I really noticed was that because I was co-producing as somebody who only has experience as a live theater performer, for us, you prepare, you have your performance, and then it's done. Mm-hmm. And like, that's it. And in film, as I learned, that is in fact not the process. But because the producer did not know that, one of the producers, I really learned later that my post-production schedule was quite ambitious because we finished filming and I said, great, so my thing is done. Can I see the edit next week?
Oh my gosh. Editor's like,
oh yeah.
What?
Everyone was sort of like, oh my gosh. But I mean, it was great because it actually got things wrapped quite quickly. But yeah, learning about, it was very much learning by doing. And that was amazing. I think sitting in with Thilo Jaeger, was our wonderful cinematographer and our editor, and sitting in the edit booth with him and realizing the depth of creativity that is a video edit. And someone said, I think it was Mary, had this wonderful quote that the film that you plan is not the film that you shoot, and the film that you shoot is not the film that you edit. Like, it is constantly changing. And you really don't know what you have a sense and you try to plan as much as you can, but then in the end, you have the footage you have. Mm-hmm. And using kind of all of your creativity and problem solving skills to put that together. And there were moments where I would say, no, it has to be like this. We planned it like this. And then you go, oh, but it's just not, it will not work like that. Mm-hmm. And right at that moment of intense frustration, you see this other solution, which is actually way cooler. Mm-hmm. And so it taught me a lot about just being open to possibility and being flexible in good faith and finding new ways.
Being open, that's what I love about the collaborative process, because you never know where it's going to take you. And yes, what you envision in your mind, the end product just is always a million times better because everyone's put their magic dust on it.
That's really true. For this film, we just had such an amazing team from all over the world, and a lot of really, really generous, creative people. Oh, I just wanted to say, I'm so incredibly excited that it's being shown in Philadelphia with Opera Philly. This is just one of my favorite cities, and I had such a good time as a student at the Academy of Vocal Arts there, and was privileged enough to be able to work on some new music with Opera Philadelphia while I was there. And it's really a dream that Obscura Nox can be part of the first film festival.
Oh, it's so exciting. Opera Philly is just tremendous too.
It's where it's at. They're just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been blown away by every production. Like it's always the productions are always just next level, and it makes me so proud to be from Philadelphia.
Yes.
So proud.
It's the best city ever.
Yeah.
I love it.
But what is next for you, Julia? You're living in Germany.
I am. I'm living in Berlin, and I'm studying right now, preparing for my next gig. It's Cinderella by Alma Deutscher with Opera San Jose, and I'm playing one of the wicked stepsisters.
Oh, that's fun.
Yes. So I'm looking forward to that.
Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to be part of Creative Space. You are abounding with creative energy, and just you're such an inspiration. Seriously, I'm honored to have you as a guest.
Jen, this was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh.
Really nice.
For more on Julia Dawson, be sure to visit her website, juliadawsonopera.com, and follow her on social media at Julia Dawson Opera. If you'd like to watch her film, Obscura Nox, I've included a link to it in the show notes. And thank you so much for tuning in and growing in creativity with us. I'd love to know what you thought of today's episode, what you found most interesting, what you found most helpful. You can reach out to me on social media at Jennifer Logue, or leave a review for Creative Space on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover it. I appreciate you so much for being here in the beginning stages of this. My name is Jennifer Logue, and thanks for listening to this operatic episode of Creative Space. Until next time.